Welcome everyone to our community learning session. We are one more time on Tuesday night live with some very special guests. I know that tonight you will not be disappointed that you have joined us because we have a really great time of learning and connecting planned for tonight. So just to let you know what you can expect as we get kicked off, we are going to look at the topic of grief. Now I know that everyone listening has experienced loss in some form. So we have experienced it ourselves and we have walked through it with other people that we know and love. My hope in doing this session tonight really is quite simple. I really believe that as we share our stories and we connect together and learn, we can become better equipped to love and care for each other. So that's why I'm doing this, and these guests here are going to help you understand grief. Jill is a clinical therapist and a registered social worker, and she has been guiding and leading us through our little chats, preparing for this session, helping us to understand the complexity of grief. We hope that tonight we can untangle some things like fear and some lies of shame and things that happen in the process of grief. We want to help you understand how big it is. And really, at the end of the day, this isn't about us having answers. We're not going to give you a one-size-fits-all answer to, the grieving problems that we face, but what we hope is that really we will give you tips and tools and just greater understanding. And at the end of this, you will be more equipped to love and walk alongside of each other as you journey through loss and grief. So before we begin, I want to give you just a second. I'm going to go on my Facebook right now, and I want to share this event on my Facebook page, and you might want to do the same. So I'm just going to hit share, watch with me, friends, and post. It's that simple. And maybe some people that are on my Facebook now can join in and be part of this conversation. As we wrap up tonight, we're going to have a Q&A time. And look, we have questions. We've just enjoyed sharing with each other and asking questions. So you may have some questions. We're going to leave a bit of time as we finish tonight. So if you're listening and think of a good question, just write it down in the comments. And by the way, I would love for you to tell us right now where you're listening from. Jill is an Islander where I come from. So if you're on PEI, you need to give a shout out and let Jill feel some love. Rose is coming all the way from the West. So if we have any Westerners, well, they didn't even eat supper yet, but maybe they're still listening right now. If not, we're going to share with them folks later. They can watch it later on. And Tyler and I here repping Nova Scotia. So just put in the comments tonight on Facebook, where you're listening in from. We want to connect. We want to walk through this together, learn together. And I promise you, you are going to be blessed as you listen to these stories that we have to share tonight. So we've shared it. We've liked it. We're here. Let's dive in. Our first guest that I want to introduce you to tonight is Rose Brower-Young. Now, I've known Rose for many years. This is a dynamic lady. She is a district superintendent. She has been a pastor. She is a speaker, a leader, a mom. She's just all around. Well, she's going to tell us not to label people and look at me introducing her that way. But anyway, I won't say any more. I want to give the floor to Rose, and she is going to help us as she walks through a little of her journey with grief and loss. Rose.
Thanks, Jodi, for inviting me to be a part of this hour. Lovely people, and I appreciate hearing the story and the journey of each one of you. They're significant, and they really do teach us about ourselves and one another. So thank you for trusting me with your stories. So I'll just very briefly share with you some of my journey so far. Well, I was in college. I married my college sweetheart, and together we started off life together. Might as well be poor under one roof, right? And we're married at 21, knew exactly what we were doing. And really just, he was my best friend. We had 2 children, a little girl and a little boy. And in 2004, we had gone for holidays together. It was the first time because our work took us where we were very busy in the summer. We were working in kids' work. And so we're often in the playgrounds in the park. So this was the first time in several years we'd taken 1 week in the middle of summer to be together. And I look forward to this. And the second day of our holidays, my husband had gone for a cycle ride and about 100 kilometers, and he was about 26 kilometers away when he fell off of his bike. I wasn't with him, he was with his brother, and he had suffered a massive heart attack and did not survive that. And so when we received word at the campground that there had been a cycling accident, you know, I was wondering what was going on. And when we went to the emergency hospital, I was taken to a side room and was told that Kelly was no longer with us. And it just sent it was such a shock to my system. You know, that morning we had said goodbye to Daddy as he's heading down the road. We never saw him again until he was in the room, and we saw him still with some of the apparatus on, and which actually was healthy for us to gain closure quite quickly, because it took a while for us to process that. Our children, Raylee was 10, our daughter was 10, and my son Brock was 8. And all of a sudden we were a family of 3. So it really impacted our family. And so the journey has gone, you know, a lot of my husband's name was Kelly Brower. And so life, a lot of it is defined before Kelly died and after Kelly died. He was 36 when he passed away.
Well, thank you, Rose. And we have been just enjoying our time of sharing and all the things that you have taught me. I'm anxious to get into that. We're going to jump to Tyler. We want to kind of put our stories together, and then we'll begin to help pull out really important things to help all those that are listening to really get some nuggets from what we can share. We talked about how you experience the loss of a spouse, and grief that comes from losing a spouse or a child is the most acute and certainly the longest lasting, as Jill shared with when it's a child. But it's sometimes we box that's all what the grief is, and we think, okay, that's grieving when someone dies. But we want to look tonight and bring validation to those of you who may be listening who have experienced grief but not felt validated in that because it wasn't from someone dying. So we're gonna unpack that concept tonight, and we're gonna start with Tyler. Tyler, as you know, Tyler Hobbs is my colleague here at Oxnaz. Go team! And Tyler, he was 7 years as a combat engineer and was injured. And so Tyler experienced grief from a very different type of loss. Tyler, can you just let those listening know a little bit about what you experienced?
Certainly. So yeah, I was a combat engineer in the Canadian Armed Forces for 7 years. It was a career that I enjoyed. It was a career that I was good at. And, you know, there was one day we were parachuting. I was a paratrooper as well as a combat engineer. And upon landing, I broke my spine and sustained a brain injury, and which ended up leading to the end of my career. Like a lot of men do, and a lot of women too, we kind of find our identity in our profession. You know, so I was Tyler Hobbs, the combat engineer. It was good half of my identity or more. And so I lost that in 2009. And the thing with being in the Army and a lot of jobs, it's more of a lifestyle than a job. And so when I lost that, I lost my whole lifestyle. I lost my identity, and all of a sudden I went from Tyler Hobbs, you know, combat engineer, veteran of Afghanistan, paratrooper, to Tyler Hobbs, married to Leah Hobbs. And that was what I had left. And I don't want to say that like it's something terrible. It's great to be married, but
we love you, Leah.
Yes, my friend challenged me, you know, shortly after I had lost my job, because I was getting in kind of a funk, and he challenged me and he said, you know, I can't believe you're upset about this. He said, you know, look what you have. And I said, yeah, you're looking at what I have. Meanwhile, I'm stuck looking at what I've lost. And it was a big change for me. I went from busy every day to busy 0 days. I went from being this big soldier guy to being what I felt like being nothing. No job and in pain every day, just sitting around at home. It was a dark few years.
So we hear in both Rose's story and in Tyler's that there's this identity shift, and we're going to go there. We want to talk about a little bit more on what it's like to get a new label and stigma and some of those things. So let's hold on to those thoughts. And I just want to also let you hear from Jill. Like I said, Jill is a clinical clinical therapist. She has her own business and she's helping people every day. Helping helpers, and really we're thankful that she's here and helps, from that wisdom that she has in her education to help us walk through some of this. But like we talked, she's a person, and so as a human, she's experienced loss. So Jill, why don't you just let people know a little bit about yourself and give you a minute to introduce yourself.
Well, thanks, Jodi, for having me. I'm here on this panel, I guess, originally, like Jodi said, in the capacity of a professional and teacher of grief and loss. But I'm like every one of you who's listening right now, probably. To live is to endure suffering. Amen. Mostly, I think the message I have is that I caution each of us not to compare our lives to another person or the type of trauma we had, because no matter what has really happened to us, if it matters to us or it matters to you, then it's important. And so when we're grieving, we can experience symptoms of grief like anger, despair, depression, all of those things of questioning, and all the physical symptoms too, like not sleeping or not eating or overeating or drinking or drinking, all of the things that we do to cope in life that are sometimes not healthy. And so I was going to talk tonight about traditional, like, I guess, grief. When we think of grief, we often think of death and dying. But there's another kind of grief too, and it's called disenfranchised grief. And so I thought to myself, well, like all of you listening, you've probably had both too. We've heard from Rose, and she talked about losing a spouse, and that is one of the most acute types of grief. I know that both my mother and my sister lost spouses in their 40s or late 30s and 40s, and that is acute. And I thought, I guess my first loss that I ever had, I was 8 years old, and I found my grandmother, and she was dead in bed. And I remember that was the first time that I had ever really saw someone like dying. And so I've experienced that. And I guess when I thought about traditional loss, in my 20s, my father died of terminal cancer, and I was there with him when he died. And also my grandfather died the same year. So that's like cumulative grief. And I had lived with him for about 20 years. So I guess I had, when I thought about it, I was like, I guess I could share that too. I have experienced loss. So then there's disenfranchised grief. And that's when it's grief like Tyler talked about, where it's not actually something that maybe society recognizes. He recognizes it, we recognize it because we feel the pain. So then I thought to myself, well, this disenfranchised grief, it's a term that came out in the 80s by Dr. Ken Doda. And basically what it means, it's anything that society doesn't maybe recognize fully as grief. So I thought to myself, what are some examples that I might have experienced? And I know if you want to put in the comments, if you're listening, the more we can be aware of the types of things people feel pain about, the more we can help them. So I've had a miscarriage. That's a type of disenfranchised grief. Yeah, Jodi, yeah. I don't know, and probably people listening, because 1 in 4 women have miscarriages. And that's a type of grief that is often not, some people might not even know that you're going through that. So that's an example of one. Another type of disenfranchised grief is a divorce. I've also been divorced. I'm sure many people have been touched by divorce listening. It could be a series of failed relationships. That's another thing. There could be losses with that, or just even dealing with infertility or dealing, or I personally have no children, so living a life as a non-parent can sometimes be, or maybe you're listening and you've looked for a spouse and you've always wanted to have a spouse and you don't have that, or maybe you don't have the education that you wanted to have, and you're upset that didn't come through to you, because the definition of grief is when you really want something in your life, or you lose something and life isn't the way that you had planned. And so anything that falls in that category, I mean, right now, even with COVID-19, if you have a youngster that's supposed to be graduating and they're not going to have a graduation, that too is grief. And so grief can bring about feelings like I talked about earlier, like depression and anger. And so these things can be very difficult. And in disenfranchised grief, there's a couple of other things too, just to close on my section here. There can be issues if a grief is stigmatized, or if a death is stigmatized, if it's suicide. No one wants to talk about that. Or if you have a loved one that was drinking and driving or had an accident, those are things people don't want to discuss. There's also grief that's seen as insignificant. Maybe, you didn't have the title of wife. Maybe you were common law, or maybe you were a step parent. So sometimes grievers aren't acknowledged. And sometimes if people are really old, they say, well, they had a long life, but there's grief there too, or if they had a chronic illness or a mental illness and were suffering. So I looked through, there's a lot of research. There's an article I read recently with 64 different types of losses that aren't death. But we do know, I want to recognize, we know that the loss of a spouse and the loss of a child are the most acute and traumatic and very difficult to work through. But in saying that, there are so many other types of grief too, whether it's disability or I could just go on. Like I said, there's a list of 64 things. So, and I know when I'm teaching this with students, we have like pages of flip charts of things people are grieving over. So we know there's a lot of pain and it can be a difficult time. So.
Thanks, Jill. And I would like to encourage, if there's anyone listening that would like to get a copy, in our Facebook where you're listening, right on our page, you can hit send message, and you can send me a message and ask, and we will get that to you if that would be helpful. I really wanted Jill to spend some time unpacking that, because I feel that it's important that we validate the people that are listening and struggling because of something that maybe they've minimized. Like Jill said, it's maybe something that you are struggling with, something that you don't have, some gap between a loss of what you hope or dream or what you had or didn't have and what your reality is. And in that, there's loss. And in that loss, we need to walk through the valley, the valley and the processes of grief. And so I hope that helps those that are listening who maybe have been shoving it down. And we talked about this as we were preparing. There's that what did Jill say? Don't should yourself. You maybe are saying like, I should feel this way, or I should because of my situation. And I want you to know that you are validated in what you are walking through, and that it is a loss for you, and it is important, and you shouldn't feel any different than you feel. And it's not about how you should feel. Just be who you are. And I hope that there's someone listening that finds some freedom, and maybe they didn't know. Maybe they thought they couldn't consider what they're walking through grief because, they didn't lose a spouse or a child. Maybe they felt ashamed to be struggling because it wasn't a big enough deal. So Jill, thank you for that. I think that's very helpful for a lot of people to understand how big grief is, and just how much people might be going through that's hidden, that you don't see. And speaking of hidden, I think this is a good opportunity to kind of jump back to what you said, Tyler. When we were kind of going over this in advance, you talked about hidden loss, because it's not so much that people could see what you were going through as much as maybe something more like Rose. Everybody was well aware, of what she was going through. But after the loss and you were at home, you were experiencing things that maybe people didn't see or understand. And you talked a little bit about shame. So can we just jump into that for a minute? Do you want to just kind of share that again, how you talked about, you know, as you're a Christian and you had good things, so why should you feel this shame, you know, like you should be better? Time passed.
Yeah. So, like I said, a lot of things changed. And I was on some pretty heavy medication. So I was often asleep during the day or night. You never knew when you were going to find me asleep or awake. And then dealing with depression. I was also diagnosed with depression, anxiety, PTSD from my tour in Afghanistan. And losing my career kind of amplified all that. And yeah, it was dark. It was dark for a long time. And I kind of felt that it shouldn't be. I felt that, you know, there are a lot of people that lose jobs. There are a lot of people that lose identities. Why am I still struggling with this? And it went on for a long time. It was most, like you said, it was probably most difficult because I felt alone. I felt that, you know what? No one really understands me. Mm-hmm. And I'm stuck, and I didn't really understand me, you know? I was stuck feeling all these emotions and this grief and loss, and I didn't think I should. So I didn't even understand me. And with that in my head, I knew for sure no one else could understand me. Mm-hmm. And it was just, and I was just stuck in that shame kind of cycle. Like, why do I still feel so guilty and so depressed at a loss that wasn't a loved one? Mm-hmm. You know, it wasn't like I lost somebody. I lost myself, but I didn't let myself feel that because I was too busy beating myself up for feeling depression over something I didn't think I should feel.
Yeah.
And it was kind of thrown in my face a lot too. You know, people see me, they see a 6'4" guy and they think, hey, we got to move something heavy. Let's get this guy. Meanwhile, I couldn't do it. I couldn't lift it. So did I take the time every time, again and again and again, to explain, well, here's my story and this is why I can't lift it? Or do I just say no and walk away and let them think that I'm lazy? Neither situation was really a good one to be in. And I didn't, like I said, it kept getting thrown in my face and I didn't know how to handle it. I didn't know what to say or what to do. And then, you know, add on top of that, the questions people would ask, right? You know, when we first moved here 10 years ago, people would ask, you know, what's your name? And I'd tell them, and they'd ask me who my parents were, like they would know my parents.
Who are your parents?
Yeah. And then they say, oh, that's great. And what do you do?
What do you do?
I don't do anything. And I hated that. I hated that because I was a soldier and I was good at it. And I loved the job. And that's what I did. And that's who I was. And now I don't do anything. And I kind of felt like I am nobody.
So we're hitting some good stuff here.
And again, the shame just built every time.
So I want us to look at two things in that. For anybody that's listening, I hope what you're able to take from this is you shouldn't say should. Maybe I didn't put that, Jill, help me out here, I'm saying it wrong. We are okay to feel what we feel, and it's a lie. And I guess I want to expose the lies that like Tyler expressed. You know, it was a lie that was saying he should be better by now. He shouldn't feel this way. His loss was only those things that we take them on like baggage. And we need to feel free of that. I guess that would be my hope, that you are who you are. And like Tyler, if you need longer to feel all the way better, that's okay. If you feel better now, if So Jill is going to talk a little bit about the steps of acceptance, but I think we bring shame into it when we receive something that's a lie, that's not really true. And then we fight internally with should. And the second thing that you mentioned, and I want to help the viewers because we talked about this, and this is really important, questions that make assumptions. And I know I would probably do that and never mean to hurt someone and never realize what they were walking through. So sometimes when we ask people questions like, what do you do? Or like, Jill, how many other ones do we think of? Do you have kids? Or tell me about your family. Well, if they're a person who lost a child or has a family issue or their family was broken up, we're making assumptions that you have kids, that you have family, that you have a job. So we need to really think, if we want to grow, if we want to help love each other better and care for each other better, we need to think about the assumptions that are inside of our questions. And so we can find more helpful ways to engage each other. Things like, Tyler, tell me what a day for Tyler looks like, or tell me about yourself. What's life like for you? Things like that. Jill or Rose, Tyler, anybody have any other ideas? But with these helpful questions that we can ask.
Even just how you doing?
How you doing?
You know, hey, I noticed you look grumpy. I noticed you look like you're having a bad day. How are things going?
Right. So just be thinking about the way that we engage with each other, and try to be sensitive that our questions don't make assumptions. Jill, do you have a thought on that?
Yeah, I think you've done a great job of articulating that. I think like Tyler said, you just don't want to make assumptions about anything. Just ask how are you doing? An open-ended question is what it's called. So it starts, who, what, when, where, why, and how, versus like a specific question. And then listen. That's really the biggest thing to do. I know for anybody listening, if you've ever gone through anything, sometimes you just want someone to hear you, and that's enough.
That's right. So if you're listening now to our sharing and you're going to make a commitment to say, I'm going to try to ask opening questions, you need to hit that like button. We need to know that you're awake and you're with us out there. And that is a helpful tip that we want that to land for you. Now, as much as we talk about that, Jill, we just mentioned about being there for each other. And I know when we are around people that are going through grief, going through loss, maybe like Rose, people around you were thinking, I want to help. How do I help? I know there's probably some people listening right now that can think of someone who's grieving. In Nova Scotia, we have been just so many losses around us. And maybe there's someone who think, but I don't know, I'm not qualified. I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do. Rose, I know you use the term, the ministry of presence or something, the gift of presence. Can you unpack that for us?
Yeah. I think one of the things that I experienced, and I probably did the same thing before Kelly passed away, was tried to fix it for people. They're sad and I want to fix it for them. You know what? You can't fix this. But the people that I think were the most healing, comforting for me were those that just walked with me. So I think of my sisters. I have two sisters, and God bless my brothers-in-law, because almost every night about 10:30, I'd get on the phone with one of my sisters and they just let me talk about life. So the report cards were due, or, this bill was late, or, just every day-to-day things that normally I would have done with my spouse, who's no longer there. My sisters were there just to hear me out. And it wasn't any ground shaking material, but they were there for me. And it was more than just once or twice. It was more than month 1 or month 2. It was like month 8 into the second year, that kind of thing. And I just really appreciated and valued that. There's one lady who every year on the anniversary of Kelly's death, she would send me a thinking of you card. Like year 5, I was still getting cards from this lady. Who does that? You know, the fact that she would be thinking about it just really impacted me. And I think if we can recognize the empathy that needs to happen between one another, and I recognize that we all have busy lives, maybe we're too busy. If we're too busy, we can't slow down and just be with somebody. I know we can't be with everybody, but I think that we are in places for a reason. And if somebody's in our path and is struggling with grief, maybe we're there to be a present part. So
your encouragement for anyone listening is, don't think that you're not qualified. Just be there. Just be present and listen and just show up. I think we need to promise ourselves, all of us and those listening, that we're going to take courage and just do it. Because there's nobody who has all the answers, and there's no one who just feels like I'm going into this to fix this problem. There's no fixing. It's just loving and caring for each other. So we can love and care for each other by showing up. We can love and care better for each other by framing questions that don't assume things that can be hurtful. And another thing that you talked about, Rose, a little bit with me earlier, was about the stigma that comes with new titles. And I want to get into identity a little bit, because Tyler mentioned the word identity, like everything changed when his identity changed. You talked about, you go from being mom and family of 4 to now words like widow and single parent, and they land on you. So tell us how that felt and how you kind of wrestled with some of the stigma and the titles and labels.
The night that Kelly died, we were back in our tent trailer, and it was just pouring rain out of the campsite. And I did not sleep at all that night. I just kind of sat there and, sorry. I don't always like going back there, So sometimes things probably don't think about too much, but I sat there and I thought, I'm a widow. I didn't want to be a widow. That's a terrible title. I was 37. I felt like I was a has-been. What did I have to offer? My life was over. And same thing with being a single parent. I would rather be with single parents and work with their families, but I didn't want to be one myself. And the whole thing was out of my control. And I've heard about grief experts. One of the things they tell us is that you cannot control the process of grief. And I can remember waking up in the morning, it's like, I still can hardly catch my breath. Like I just still feel this weight. And when is this going to be over, And so that whole thing, like I felt like when people looked at me, they said, oh, there's the poor lady who lost her husband. Or they would look at my kids and they'd say, oh, those are the orphans, in the school. My daughter is very creative, and she loves to dance. And I thought they need to see that side of her. They need to see my son's ability for justice and analyzing things. And he's comes alongside and fixes problems. He's not this little orphan son that no longer had a daddy, like, I don't know why, but those things really bothered me. And I thought, we're still a family, this world, churches included, we're not really set up for anybody that doesn't look like a traditional family. You go to restaurants, they're in tables of 4. Right? So often we get stuck at this little table of 2, and they kind of bring another chair over or something like that. It's very difficult to try and adjust. And so that stigma of who are you, I had to really think that through. Kelly and I did a lot of work together, both in the church and outside the church. And I had to decide, is that still me? Because Kelly was a big part of that. So what was, it felt like we talked earlier as we were discussing, how grief feels like your arm is cut off, right? That kind of thing. And there was a big piece of me that was missing. And so I had to realize, not that I had to reinvent myself, but I had to really reflect and take time to process what am I going to look like now? But I sure really struggled with the stigma of some of those labels.
And I think,
sorry.
What's that, Tyler?
Well, I just wanted to touch on that point where she said, like, who are you? It was the same for me. Not the same, similar, where I would, and then after I released from the Army, I kept, this thought kept coming in the back of my head, I was part of my country's fist, but now I'm part of my country's baggage, because they were still paying me 70% of what I was making. And now I just kept thinking the thoughts, like, say the pay was $1,000 a month. Well, that's $1,000 they couldn't give to the police. That's $1,000 they couldn't give to highways or education or civil service or the hospitals. Well, we can't give that $1,000. We got to give that to Tyler every month. And so I kept feeling like I was part of my country's baggage, and that becomes something you fight against or you accept. And unfortunately, I accepted it for a while. I accepted that lie. Mm. It really changes. It changes you. Such things change you.
And I think for all of us, as we look at the things that we've experienced in loss, maybe even for every person who's listening even now, thinking about how it impacts our identity. We just want the loss not to be there. I mean, that's the pain, right? I remember for me when my parents divorced, I remember for years I just wanted my family and to be back whole, the way that I wanted it. And I know I also struggle with the fact that I had friends who lost a parent, but for me, I still knew in my heart what I experienced was like the loss of a family unit the way that we were, but no one kind of helped me to understand in those words that was okay, that was grieving. Like we have that such deep, like I just want it to be different. There's a profound sadness in grieving, and there's every kind of emotion of anger and fear and everything that we process through. But from my heart in this moment, I just want to share my thoughts on identity, because the very nature of who God created us to be, we can have identity and purpose, and we wrap it up sometimes in being a wife or being a spouse or a worker or in something that we label upon ourselves. And so I think sometimes it's that hard work of knowing who I am and that I'm just enough being me, but it's not as easy as saying it. It's not like you can snap your fingers, but it's working through that, just working through that loving ourselves. So loving ourselves is part of walking through grief as much as loving and caring for each other, because the lies come at you. You shouldn't be happy. Rose, I'm sure that one landed on you. If you felt joy and happiness, perhaps you walked through that guilt of, should I feel this way? I'm guessing you experienced that.
Oh yeah. And
yeah.
The opportunity to feel happiness, right?
Mm-hmm.
True and deep happiness. When you were talking about that, I was thinking that the timing of grief, because nobody wanted to get out of that abyss of grief faster than I did, right? I hated waking up every morning and still feeling that weight on me. And it takes longer. And I'm not even sure that you can get over grief. I think you just learn to live through it. And there's still time. Go ahead.
No, you go. That was the analogy, but I'll tell it in a minute. You go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. And so in my circumstance, every time there's a rite of passage, so my daughter just got married 3 months ago, right? Daddy should have been there, right? And so it keeps stirring some things up that you have to live. And so I know it's going to continue through life. And so, but I promise you that weight, that there is one who walks with us, that helps us carry that, right? And but it takes longer than I would have expected. The pre-Kelly days or the pre-death Kelly days, it's longer than I would have expected. And so I think we need to be careful to extend grace to one another once we've identified that that person's going through grief, and not expect that it has to look a certain way or that's only for a certain amount of time. I don't know what your regulations are necessarily in Nova Scotia. Sometimes people get like 3 days off for bereavement leave from work.
Yeah.
3 days, like you're just learning to, you know, put cream in your coffee after 3 days. So
yeah, I'm good.
Yeah, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think we need to be gracious to one another. And also wanted to say, as we did, and I talked about this before, that I think those people who are grieving, we need to receive what people are willing to offer. I had expectations of people, the ones that were close to me, my circle, that they would be there for me in a certain way. Now, I don't think I could verbalize it quite well. And so when they weren't there the way I thought they should be, that was very hurtful for me. Mm-hmm. And we just need to be willing to accept, you know, like what you had addressed earlier, Jill, that sometimes people don't know what to say. And Tyler had mentioned that too. And so they may hold back because they don't want to hurt anymore. And so we just need to show grace to one another as well.
Mm-hmm. So I want to give,
Sorry.
Jill, just before you jump in, I want to give anybody listening the chance to put some questions on the feed while Jill comes with a little comment here. I'll be watching and we can take any questions that you have.
I just wanted to say that I like what you said, Rose, is so true. You know, we can get hurt if we're going through things that, you know, especially if it's something, it's a grief and loss that everyone's aware of. I mean, it's more difficult if it's something that, you know, people don't know about, but you can get very hurt by that. And then the other thing too, I've had so many people in therapy come to me and say, you know, they said this to me and it was so hurtful. So even if you do go to support someone, sometimes just listening and just being a presence, as we talked earlier, is the best, because there's a lot of hurt that can happen with I do this exercise with students and I say, so what is the most ridiculous thing people have ever said to you while you're grieving? And we equally have about 5 flip chart pages on that as well. So, you know, and so anybody listening, if you've ever had someone, if you've gone through something horrific and they say something that's completely off the wall and insensitive, I think just knowing, like you said, Rose, people don't know what they don't know. It's like an unconscious incompetence. You don't know what you're saying. And so if you are grieving out there and people have said some ridiculous things to you, it's probably because they just don't know and they're awkward too.
Right. So we need to extend grace and as those that are coming alongside, just understand that there's no time. There's no time frame to grieving. There's no right or wrong way. What Rose was speaking about earlier, I was sharing with the crew here. Pastor Sheila, who many of you on PEI have encountered. She is an amazing lady who does grief counseling and the western end of PEI especially. But I was working with somebody one time. I phoned her up and I said, you know, give me some helpful, you know, I'm not that experienced. Give me some helpful tips here. She shared something with me that I found was so clear and helpful. She said, the way that you can experience or understand grief would be like the loss of an arm. You can find a way to live healthy and vibrant and a meaningful, purposeful life, but you never forget that you have no arm. Like if you lost an arm, you will always have that reality. So people need space to understand. I think that was your comment earlier, Rose. It's always going to be there, but it doesn't mean that we have to be overcome with, I have no identity or purpose or meaning, or just give ourselves space when the shameful things come on us, like, you know, or things that make us feel guilty. When those waves roll over us, let them wash over and then try to let them, like the ocean, just go back out to sea. Because the thoughts to make us feel guilty or shameful or question our value, they will come. And the process is an ongoing thing. And while we would love to have this time and just say, here's the package and the answer, and there is no ending, there is no end. It's finding meaning and purpose. And like I said in the very beginning, my heart is that we would learn together. We would learn from what we've heard and what's been shared, that loss is just bigger than sometimes than what we imagined, that we are okay to feel grief when someone else's loss is bigger. You don't compare traumas, right, Jill? That's Jill's line. We don't compare traumas. We don't put a time frame on. We feel as we feel. And yet there could be some people that are listening who, you know, they've really come to a point where they're processing, and their place in grief maybe is an unhealthy place. So Jill, could you give us some ideas of maybe some red flags or some boundaries, where if there's anyone listening that has been walking through grief, is experiencing certain things, that you would want to let them know these are indicators that they need to really see professionals and get some more supports than maybe they have right now?
I just wanted to say too that a lot of my learning and my initial passion back in my 20s came from Sheila as well.
Yeah, cool.
Because she
Shout out to Sheila.
She taught me a lot, and I think anybody who goes through any type of a loss, it's valuable to have grief counseling. Mm-hmm. Or to attend a grief support group, of which or a course on grief, and that's what I did with her way back when, and I found it really helpful. And so I think you know, if you're noticing, like, I guess part of grief is anger, part of grief is despair, like I talked about, in depression. So if you're experiencing grief and you've never had a mental health issue before, we all have mental health, just like we have physical health. And if you've never had any kind of if you've been fortunate enough to have good mental health and never have experienced that pain, if you walk through grief, you're going to feel that kind of pain. You're going to feel the kind of pain that people with chronic depression feel every day of their lives. And you're going to probably come out having a lot more empathy for people that struggle with, say, generalized anxiety disorders or clinical major depressive disorder, or that have it ongoing. And so I think that if you're noticing that you don't have enough supports, because how we deal with grief has a lot to do with our innate, like our characteristics, our personality. It has a lot to do with our, you know, maybe our socioeconomic status, our faith, our support networks, our connections to others. So it really depends on where you're at in life, and you may be able to mitigate the symptoms of grief by all of those other supports that you have. But there's a lot of pain, and there could be times where you really need to reach out to a professional. So in those situations, it could be, you know, if you're finding yourself, you know, not being able to carry out, you know, just day-to-day life, you know, I say to clients, you know, are you in the fetal position? We're putting a Kleenex into the garbage can is a day's work. You know, that's a place where you can be in the beginning. But if, you know, if that persists on for a long period of time, as Rose said, society gives us about 3 days off work if we're fortunate to have that kind of a job that offers benefits. That's about all you get. So I think it's, I guess my perspective may be somewhat biased, because I think, you know, you don't have to be in a rock bottom to get help. I always think of it, I have a good colleague, and she always says, you know, if you might be on the 8th floor of the elevator, but you just want to get to the 9th, you don't have to wait till you're on the bottom floor to get help.
And I'm going to make sure that everybody is able to access Jill's business and what they do, because I am such an advocate, like, for everybody to go from the 8th floor to the 9th floor. There's nothing wrong with getting help the way that we need it. If we had broken legs, we go to the doctor. The fact is, when we need help, there's people that work hard so they can help us. We can learn from each other, and we can learn from professionals. So I'm going to make sure that you can get fully in contact with Jill and what she does. Now we have a couple of questions I want to pull up here. So we had one person who mentioned in our comments that she never thought of her children experiencing grief going through her divorce, which I was on the child side of that, and so I expressed that. and now they're grown, and she knows maybe that has affected them. So Jill, maybe would you have advice of with adult children who lived through a divorce that maybe, you know, didn't process maybe some of that grief to the family unit, action steps or steps they might want to take?
Well, just you can probably speak to it because you have lived experience, and lived experience is invaluable. But but again, everyone's situation is unique. So according to research, though, like that is, you know, having that happen is traumatic. It is a loss because you're grieving forever. And it's sort of like what Rose just talked about with the family wedding. It's the same. It's the same with a family unit where there's divorce. Like there's event after event where you can be triggered by that. And it takes a long time to process and work through that. And it's a grief. And like Jodi said, it's often not recognized. It's really not. And even if it was a difficult situation where it was a good thing that it happened for both partners, it still is a loss for children. Quite a horrific loss, actually, if you look it up. So it's a lot to work through. So thanks for mentioning that, Jodi.
Yeah. And I would say we do not compare time frames. And I have another question or comment that came up here, and it was about I have felt like some people were thinking I needed to get over it. So I just want to speak to that and to say that I would say I was a solid 10 years where that was deeply, deeply painful for me. And I was just a kid, like it wasn't my own divorce. You know, and I know that all the traumas that we face, they impact us. And that's, as a spiritual leader, that's, you know, where I help people. Jill, as a professional, does it the same way, and Rose and Tyler the same as I do. So there's no time frame. And I think that that's one of those lies that we just have to not receive it. I was looking actually at a little thing that I had here, and it shared some myths. And I think these are cool just to expose because they're lies. It says the pain will go away faster if you ignore it. Not true. It's important to be strong in the face of loss. You know what? Be who you are. And then on the other hand, if you don't cry, it means that you aren't sorry. Not true. Everyone expresses things differently. Grieving should last a year. Well, sorry, but you know, it's not true. And moving on means forgetting about your loss. When you believe that, that's when you start to feel that guilt about finding joy. So there's so many things that we could spend more time on, but I want to give everybody kind of just a last quick go around. Something that you want to leave that's on your heart, that you want to make sure those people that were listening tonight, that they know this to be true from you. So whoever wants to jump in, I'll give you a minute to think and give everybody a chance to get their final word. Who's ready?
I think for me, I'd like to address that comment earlier. I have felt like some people were thinking that I needed to get over it. For my closing point, with the loss of the identity that I had, with the loss of the use of my body as I knew it, even still, I can't lift very much. It's been 11 years now since I released from the military, and I'm still not over it. I don't see a way where I could get over something that I'm reminded about often, even daily sometimes. And I think the best thing that I could do for me and for my children even, and my wife, I think the best thing that I could do is just to accept that, you know what, I may not get over it, and that has to be okay. I have to be okay with that. So that way I kind of head off any of the feelings of shame before they get there, which just compound everything I feel. So if I can eliminate an entire layer of feelings that bring me down, I think I should go for it. That's kind of my closing thought.
Thanks, Tyler. It's kind of like living with the arm It's not coming back. It's you got to let it, it is what it is. Rose or Jill, do you have a thought ready to share?
Yeah, in one thought. Okay, quickly, because it's 4:58 here.
No, you say your thought.
You know, if your life's not all rainbows and lollipops, there's nothing wrong with you. And we are not meant to be alone. You know, God's created us to be in community, and we need to receive that from one another, and just embrace that and walk with one another, because somebody beside you is probably grieving, and someday you will probably be the one that's grieving. And so we need to be looking out for one another. So don't put the blinders on, be discerning.
Mm-hmm. Lots of good in there. Thanks, Rose.
And I just thank you, Jodi, for coordinating this, because you know, in my work, I know all of you are pastors and leaders, so I really appreciate bringing in the therapy side and the psychology side to things, because we all have mental health, just like we have physical health, and grieving and loss can affect our mental health, and it's normal. And I guess that's what I want to leave with, that these things, any pain that you go through, it's normal to have emotions. And sometimes we're told, don't be angry, don't be upset, just smile and just put on a brave face. And I guess that if you do that, then those emotions have to go somewhere, and then usually are dealt with in an unhealthy way. So it's okay to feel them. And I guess that's what I believe with, that it is okay. And you just learning to adjust to whatever, and finding meaning in grief and loss. There's a 6th stage now. David Kessler's work has talked about a 6th stage called finding meaning. And like Tyler said, you know, it's just you have to get to the point where I may never get over this. I know that I'm not a mother. I will never be a mother. That ship has sailed. So you just take your situation, for instance, in whatever it could be for you. I just use that as an example. But whatever it is for you, and try to find a way through that. So I'd leave it that whatever, if you're upset about something, it's okay. And you may never get over it. And that is okay too.
That's acceptance, right? Well, before I want to thank Rose and Tyler and Jill for sharing tonight. And before I share my final thought, I want to say, if this was helpful to you, could you make sure on Facebook that you like this post or put a big heart? So send some love to these people to tell them from you listening on the other end that you appreciated all that they shared tonight. We want to see the love going out, because they were real and authentic and shared some of the pain of their loss, so that you could learn how to love each other better and just learn a little bit more about this journey that we have in community, needing each other. And lastly, if you would share this, maybe others that you know, that are your friends with, under your connections, they could be helped by this. So if you would just take some time to recommend it, share it privately or on your Facebook, however you would like. I just believe that this encouragement could help so many people. And lastly, what I want to share with you tonight is that you are made unique and for a very special purpose. And while we're in this world, we will have loss, and we will have heartache, and we will have trouble. But we have to accept the bad, go through the journey together. We need each other. And I just hope that you know that there's value to your life, that God can heal, and that He has purpose and plans for you. And so in all that, I hope that this was a little bit to help you to love better, to care for each other better. And I want to pray a blessing over you as we close tonight. So let me pray for you now. Heavenly Father, I thank you that you are a God of love, and that you are healing and strength and wisdom and courage. Father, I pray for everyone listening tonight that has that pain of loss that maybe bubbled up as we shared a little bit on it tonight. I pray that you would minister to them healing, that they would know that you have made them and created them for good things and purpose, and they would be reminded as they heard the stories of those that shared tonight, that you can bring so many good things out of difficulty and loss. Father, I pray that you would bless each listener tonight, that you would help them in their journey, help them to love better and learn how to grow together as people that need each other, and just bless each one tonight. In Jesus' name I ask, amen. So that's it from us tonight. Go and love and endure the grief together and find that place of acceptance and strength. Thank you for joining us tonight. We will put Rose and Tyler and Jill, I'll put all their connections so that you can reach out to them if you want to. That will all be in the comments below, and have a great night.
Thanks,
Bye.
Jodi. It was great to be with you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Tyler, for your insight, and Jill for your wisdom.
Nice to meet you, Tyler. Great to see you, Rose. That was so good.